Welcome to this edition of Ritter's Rant. Today, we're going to discuss international law, in particular, how it applies to the United States of America. The United States of America is a nation defined by law. Our Constitution is the founding law of the land. It defines us as a nation of laws, and we have principles and values that are linked to these legal concepts. But for laws to be viable, they have to be enforceable and to be enforced. If you have a law on the books and people are allowed to break it willy-nilly, you might as well not have the law. You become a land that's no longer defined by the rule of law, but by lawlessness. Let's take a look at how the United States operates internationally, in particular with the case of the ongoing Israeli-Iranian conflict. Let's just start off by the fact that Israel began this conflict with a surprise attack. We Americans understand that. On December 7th, we celebrate Pearl Harbor Day. Pearl Harbor Day was the day that Imperial Japan attacked the Pearl Harbor Naval Base in Hawaii, a day that President Roosevelt labeled as a day of infamy. Infamy is not a good word. It's a word that condemns the perpetrator, and Japan was condemned for their actions and continually will be remembered as a nation that carried out a surprise attack against a sleeping United States. Well, Israel has carried out a Pearl Harbor type attack against Iran. There's no justification for this attack. Israel hasn't tried to go to the United Nations Security Council under Article 51 and justify its actions based upon an imminent threat posed by Iran, because that argument would fall apart. The United States intelligence community certainly doesn't support that. There is no Iranian nuclear weapons program that poses an imminent threat. Even the International Atomic Energy Agency, which worked with the Israelis to create the perception of a threat, has to acknowledge today that no such threat exists. So Israel committed an act of aggression. If we go back to the Nuremberg tribunals, we see that Judge Jackson, who was the lead prosecutor, Supreme Court Justice prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials, labeled a war of aggression as the supreme crime, because from that crime, all other crimes emanate. And this is what Israel has done. It shouldn't be a surprise, though, that we let Israel get away with this. After all, Israel has gotten away with genocide against the Palestinian people now for many, many months. And the United States doesn't seem to be too appalled for that. But what about the behavior of the United States? You see, we're the ones that lulled Israel into a false sense of, or Iran into a false sense of complacency by promoting negotiations. We said that there is a negotiating there's an off-ramp linked to negotiations that could prevent a conflict. And if Iran would just participate, then this thing could end peacefully. And Iran was participating. Ali Shamkhani, who is the lead Iranian negotiator, 2 days before he was killed by the Israelis in their Pearl Harbor type event, said that Iran was ready to sign a treaty that said no nuclear weapons, to limit enrichment to 3.75%. That needed for the production of nuclear power, limit the number of centrifuges, to allow American inspectors on the ground to verify an agreement, to do anything necessary to prevent a war. And the Iranians were preparing for this negotiation when the Israelis attacked. But now what it appears is that the American president was complicit with the Israelis, that he had set the Iranians up. And so what we're talking about is the crime of perfidy. Perfidy is where you operate under a flag of truce, lulling the other side into believing that there is a safe space for negotiations, and then you attack them. This is a crime, a war crime. Israel has committed that war crime, but so too has the United States. We are guilty of this. And it's not just that we have committed perfidy against Iran, but we've committed perfidy in a matter that makes us to be untrustworthy anywhere in the world. Who is going to trust us going forward? And that is that's a fair and viable question. Can the United States be trusted? I just finished doing a international summit, a U.S.-Russia summit, a citizens summit, where American citizens and Russian citizens sat down and talked to one another about how we can improve relations. But the issue of trust came up. And the question is, can the Russians trust us? Now, interestingly enough, the answer was provided by the American citizens, which is no, you can't trust us. We lie. I think this put the Russians off a little bit, but it led them to say, look, we're here, we're talking to you, but if you want to rebuild trust, the onus is on you, on America. You have to take action that will help rebuild this trust. And so the question is now, how can the United States regain a reputation of being a trustworthy, um, you know, partner in peace? What do we have to do to regain the trust of the world, of Russia, of Iran, of anybody? It's almost a bridge too far, an insurmountable task. But we have to try. We have to do something. The first thing would be to stop talking about going to war with Iran. We need to acknowledge that Israel is not the victim here. Israel is the perpetrator of this violence, and that this war only ends when Israel stops bombing Iran. This war will only truly end when the world allows Iran to have a nuclear program, a peaceful nuclear program that is not constrained with any Iran-only additional protocols, that is governed by the same safeguards agreements that the International Atomic Energy Agency has with other nations, that Iran is just like every other nation in the family of nations when it comes to nuclear energy. This has to be, and it will only truly be resolved when we deal with the threat of Israel's nuclear weapons, that Israel cannot be allowed to have nuclear weapons that fall outside the framework of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and yet scream bloody murder when other nations aren't developing nuclear weapons and using their non-development of nuclear weapons as an excuse to carry out a surprise attack that could drag the United States into a regional conflict that could lead to global conflagration. But how about with Russia? How do we move forward with Russia? That's a broader question. I've been pondering for some time. And I think before we have trust, we have to have a framework upon which we can even begin the discussion. Right now, in February of next year, the New START treaty, the only remaining arms control treaty between Russia and the United States, expires. And as things stand, if it expires, both Russia and the United States will enter into a arms control race, an arms race, where we will seek to increase the number of deployed nuclear weapons. We will build new missiles. We will talk about building missile defense that will be destabilizing. In short, we will put both of our countries on a path towards eventual nuclear confrontation. The best way to prevent this is to extend this treaty, to give this treaty, an additional lifespan, and then use the time created by this extension to begin to build the trust necessary to engage in meaningful discussions that can lead to a resumption of arms control, stopping an arms race before it begins, and preventing a nuclear war before it has a chance to manifest itself. And so, the Russians had said, action, you have to undertake action. And so I'm here to tell you on Friday, I will be announcing a project, Project 38, which will lay out a campaign plan to achieve just this result, to get the United States government to agree to an extension of the New START treaty so that we can stop a nuclear war before it begins. That's my rant. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.